Today, as we enter a time of meditation to prepare us and to give us a moment of rest, hear these words from Gwen Matthews entitled, Feel That? Feel that. Each breath, every inhale, every exhale. We are living, breathing, connected. We are the whole, complete, beautiful selves that we were born to be. Feel that? In your bones, in your muscles, in your heart, and in your blood. That is the extraordinary you. The you who was born for this time, this place, this moment. Feel that? The struggle, the worry, the pain, the loss, the grief. It is still you. You are still the whole, complete, beautiful, extraordinary. Feel that. Take a moment and rest in the difficult reality that we are beautiful, extraordinary. Good morning. It is wonderful to be back with my Peace family, and hoping that you are weathering the year now of lockdown and quarantine and isolation and disconnection. And I hope that you're beginning to feel the lightness of spring coming, and hoping some changes are coming, that we're maybe turning the corner on a really difficult time. And I think it's a good time to remember that we've come through it, that we have seen things about ourselves, that we've learned things about ourselves, that we've had gifts and abilities and maybe perseverance and strength that we weren't aware of. Or maybe we just acknowledged how much we need other people. So however you find yourself today, welcome. It was funny, right before we began, I was talking to Joe and Ken, and Joe said, hey, there's this website, and these rather conservative Christian folks, and they posted something of yours. They don't seem like they're too happy with you. And surprise, Ken said, surprise, surprise. And I always joke with you that I've become a polarizing public figure talking about faith and politics, and that was never the plan. And it's really not something I enjoy. I don't enjoy being seen as a confrontational person or a troublemaker. Some days I embrace it, but most of the time I do it begrudgingly. And I bet you do as well. I bet the times that you are seen by someone else as frustrating or combative or oppositional, those realities hurt you. You don't want to be known that way, and most of the time you don't feel that you are that way. But I want to talk about that reality of what being a compassionate and passionate person will cause you, and that relational turbulence. Because if we're people of faith or morality who practice that morality in any fashion, the injustices and the inequities around us, I think they're going to, and not just those things, but the care and concern that we have for the people affected by them is going to generate this relational turbulence between us and people we know and love and come into contact with. It's going to cause fractures between ourselves and others, even those we love. And you may understand that this may be a time of fracture for you and someone else. And as we engage the world and the things and the causes and the people who matter to us, that is going to invariably place us opposite other human beings. And to some degree, we need to be okay with that. We can't deny our convictions in the world, and necessarily even soften our language to avoid relational turbulence. Because as much as we don't want to seek conflict, we can't avoid conflict either, because people are on the other side of our silence and our dodging of disagreement and our hiding. Politics and religion tend to be those things that give us problems, but I don't think they should be off limits. And I want you, as people of faith and morality and conscience, to be certain that you don't have to give up those things in order to be a good and kind person. I've always marveled at families or communities or people who say of politics and religion, we don't talk about that stuff because it ends in a fight. We don't discuss religion or politics. And I've always thought to myself, so what else of consequence is there to talk about? I mean, how much can we talk about the weather and TV shows and what our kids are doing before we end up in relationships that stay on the surface, in superficial connections? And when we talk about that stuff that's difficult to talk about, I think it's important for us to remember that that stuff that we avoid is people. That stuff that we often shy away from represents civil rights. And that stuff is human dignity of other people. That stuff is the future of our planet. So I think that stuff is the stuff we should be talking about, especially with the people we are intimately connected to. If not, how intimately are we actually connected? I remember just through this past Christmas, someone had a sign out front of their house, kind of a chalkboard sign, welcoming their holiday guests. And it said something like, welcome, make yourselves comfortable, take off your shoes, leave your religion and your politics at the door. And I think we need to name that we are not obligated to leave our convictions at the door in this life with the people who we love and respect, or at least we shouldn't have to do that. Now, we know we can't always run full steam ahead with our deepest convictions, right, on hot button issues, and knowing that they're going to put people on the defensive. We don't want to do that. We may not always lead with a point of disagreement, but we also can't afford to edit ourselves out of the deepest contents of our hearts with the people we know and live and work alongside. Not only because that's unfair to us, but because it impacts people who are not in that room. The conversations that we have with people, the difficult, relationally challenging conversations, may be the only representation vulnerable people have in the room with us as we have them. So I think the goal for compassionate people is to have authentic, non-superficial relationships, not necessarily easier ones. And I've decided in my life that if a relationship with someone I love has to face turbulence that helps someone I don't know, that has to be acceptable for me, because my privilege makes that even a consideration. So if I'm an LGBTQ teenager or a migrant human being or a person of color, I can't then opt out of those realities in order to have an easier day. So many people can't opt out of their situation, of their reality. And so I don't want to opt out of that either. I don't want to choose an easier path just because I have the option. And so one of the biggest misconceptions I think we have is that healthy relationships are going to be marked by a lack of argument or conflict, but that simply isn't true. I come from an Italian family, largely. Grew up in my mom's side, and we had volume, right? We had bombast in our family growing up, passionate expressions and colorful words. I can remember my mom, she has this booming voice, and it was always very elevated. And I remember one day saying, "Why do you yell so much?" And she said, "I yell because I care." And I said, "Could you care just a little bit less?" And the thing about our family, as I grew to understand, was the volume or the bombast or the passionate expressions or the colorful words, they didn't mean we weren't healthy. We were just honest, and that there was less pretending than maybe with some people. And I would rather have honest opposition than phony agreement in the relationships that I have. Now, another myth is that if we're good people and we choose our words carefully, that we will be universally well received. And we obviously will not. And I think saying to another human being, "You're doing damage," or "You're perpetuating racism," that's not a moral evaluation of them, or it's not even an assigning of motives to them. It's describing what we see from where we are. So It's not the intention, but the result of their position that we're talking about. So saying to someone, this is hurtful, is appealing to another person's humanity and asking them to respond, and in many ways leaving the responsibility with them for their response. You can have respectful, substantive relationships that sometimes include hard words and raised voices, and you can do everything right and still be thought of or called rude or unreasonable. And so the relational challenge for we who aspire to empathetic and decent lives is to make sure that while we're speaking with clarity and authenticity, that we're not jerks while we do it. And see, there's a fine line between passionate human being and abject jerk, and I want to be on the right side of it, even though often I'm not. And I have to name something today. I'm a jerk, and so are you. Not always, of course, but sometimes, and that sometimes is what we want to pay close attention to if a compassionate expression of our values really matters to us, and if we're truly burdened to alleviate the damage in the world and not contribute to it. And in order to better do that, I think I want to define our terms before we go any further and ask the elemental question. So what's a jerk anyway? Now, this may not be as simple as we imagine. You may remember in 1964, there was a case before the Supreme Court on the nature of pornography. And Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart remarked that although defining obscenity was a challenge, recognizing it was not. And he famously declared with unintended hilarity, regarding pornography, I'll know it when I see it. But when it comes to the jerks in our lives, we can usually spot them without much difficulty, even if specifying their defining qualities proves difficult. And with a little thoughtful reflection or sincere prayer or honest thought, we can surely recognize the jerkiness in ourselves. And so I want you to sit back and review the day that you had yesterday. For example, your interactions with spouses, partners, children, family, friends, coworkers, neighbors, strangers. And I bet you can recognize without much effort, you know when either on social media or at home or at your job, you've set out to hurt another human being and succeeded. Congratulations, you're a jerk. Generally speaking, it isn't necessarily our particular worldview or political perspective or personal opinion that's problematic, although it could be, but it's the manner in which we wield those things and the purpose for wielding them the way we do. It isn't always the message that needs to change. Sometimes it's just the heart of the messenger. And we often imagine that being a person who is loving never causes injury or initiates conflict, but it's more complicated and subtle than that. See, most of us don't like to be told we're being hurtful or rude or selfish, and we rarely receive such criticisms well, at least initially. Defensiveness is likely going to be our first response when it comes to those stories that people tell about us. And because in our story, we're usually the hero until we realize that we're not. So in this life, you've surely hurt people, and you've done so in one of two ways. Either you've accidentally damage someone by saying or doing something that you weren't aware was offensive or painful to them. Or you've intentionally wounded them because that was either partially or fully what you were trying to do from the beginning. So in the former case, that unintended injury, you were human. And in the latter case, the intentional damage, you were a jerk. And oftentimes you're the only one who knows the truth. All that to say, as we incarnate our belief systems and we try to make these theoretical things that we talk about here tangible, motives really matter. Yes, in a relationship with other people, we're going to cause inadvertent pain through ineloquence or privilege or carelessness or haste or arrogance. And those wounds we can't dismiss. Those need to be reckoned with. We can't just ignore the damage of our words and actions simply because we didn't mean to hurt someone or didn't know any better. That's part of adult accountability and personal growth. But there is something far more toxic in desiring to inflict trauma, especially if we do so while simultaneously claiming some moral high ground or righteousness in the process. I always realize that the only difference between righteousness and self-righteousness was the word self. It's me. The only thing that gets in the way of righteousness or self-righteousness, I'm the difference in that equation. So you're probably a good person. You're probably a much better person than I am. But yet you've probably experienced a moment when you came across someone on social media and you wanted to put them on blast. Or you've been in a conversation at work knowing what you're about to say would set your coworker off, but you said it. Or you've been at a family gathering holding on to a litany of insults or rebuttals that you were just waiting to unleash at the right time, and you did. Or you've been with someone you live with and chose to press a button that you knew would be painful. In these cases, it wasn't necessarily your rightness on the topic or the causes you advocated for, but your agenda that was misplaced. And I think many times what would help us is the pause. I think a sacred pause, a thoughtful pause, can help us de-jerkify ourselves. So I said I've become a polarizing public figure, and because I have been, I regularly encounter people who show up in my inbox or on my timeline or in my comment section because something I've said or written has caused them discomfort. And they arrive unannounced and unceremoniously unload a fierce and brutal verbal assault in protest or dissension. And it's often peppered with vitriol and punctuated with profanity and littered with expletives. And that's not to say these replies don't include valid criticisms, but the packaging can be less than pleasant. And many times, the only thing that saves me when it does is a pause. Because in those moments that I can stop, if I'm self-aware enough, I continually ask myself the questions which I'd like you to consider this week. As you're engaging people you disagree with, one, am I trying to understand the person or am I trying to defeat them? Is my agenda to know them or to win, whatever victory looks like for me? Am I burdened to show them something I've seen or experienced that they haven't, or to show them how much smarter or more enlightened I am? Am I genuinely seeking to change their hearts, or am I trying to make them feel like an a-hole? If I succeed in the latter, I really haven't succeeded as a decent human being. And I think these questions require more than just a passing consideration. They require daily, almost hourly investigation, because we're all pretty resistant to self-awareness. We all understand how intoxicating winning an argument or making someone feel stupid can be, but we also know that's not what kindness does. We almost always look back retrospectively and we can see where we've blown it and where we've gotten it right. Again, that isn't to say that just because we get it right, people will respond well, but we aren't fully responsible for their response to us, only our intentions toward them. We have to own our intentions and our motives completely. I think the path to a more compassionate world begins with compassionate people, and the way we become those kinds of people is startlingly simple and incredibly elusive. We try to live in such a way that we hurt people less. You've probably heard that Latin phrase, primum non nocere. It's part of healthcare students' education, and it serves as this unspoken core principle for those who go on to serve as doctors and nurses and caregivers. It's roughly translated as first, do no harm. It's the promise to protect a patient from undue injury, to do everything in your power toward that goal, and to avoid further damage to someone in the process of trying to save a life. And I suppose if we commandeer and rephrase these sentiments for the purpose of becoming decent human beings, and to craft a good rule of thumb regarding the hurting and heartbroken people who cross our paths every day, that pledge should just be restated. Don't be a jerk. I think the path to a kinder human isn't making someone feel that they like you more in order to avoid the hard words or even hurt feelings, but it's in seeking to do no harm to them. You know me, and I know many of you, that we've all had these meandering, very strange theological journeys. Our spiritual roads have diverged and traveled many roads. And my meandering 5-decade pilgrimage from theological mutt, from obedient Catholic altar boy to disenchanted teen to hopeful agnostic to defiant atheist to, humanist Christian to United Methodist megachurch pastor to deconstructing progressive to whatever I am right now, hasn't yielded much in the way of definitive statements. In fact, the single conclusion I've come to as a result of my study and prayer and wrestling and preaching, the sole universal truth that I can hold on to is that a faith conviction shouldn't make you a jerk. I mean, that's it. For me, that means if your theology or your worldview or your morality, those things are only valid to the degree that your life is loving. Beyond that, your preaching and your proselytizing and your arguing and your convincing are largely a waste of time to people. So remember this week, life is short. It is extremely fragile. People are grieving, they're struggling, they're hurting. And so be passionate and be clear and be courageous, even be confrontational. Just do your best not to be a jerk.